Okay, let's get into audience questions for the week. Many of them related to the really tragedies that we observed in the United States over the last week and a half. First question, David, we have the biggest military and most militarized police in the world. Why couldn't the Capitol Police keep rioters out? What the hell happened? And this is a question that became an important one very quickly as we were witnessing the events of January 6th, the riotous insurrection fomented by President Donald Trump. And it is true, the government spends hundreds of billions on defense, on the military, Department of the Defense, Pentagon, Department of Homeland Security, on and on and on. How is it possible that you ended up with a situation where a mob breaches the Capitol, the vice president and members of Congress are there, Secret Service and other evacuations and within minutes, this mob, I mean, we were watching it, and it wasn't very long after the debate started into the objections over Arizona that the mob had overrun the building and people needed to take shelter and on and on. So there are two big picture answers, and we'll dig into each of them. One big picture answer is they didn't understand the scope of the threat. The other big picture answer is they understood the scope of the threat and chose not to be more prepared. And there's a sort of more benign, at least as motives go, explanation for that, and the more conspiratorial one. So let's start with the most conspiratorial, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time of it absent evidence. And the conspiratorial version would be everybody knew exactly what was going to happen. And the reason police weren't prepared is because police / whoever is in power were in on a plan to allow this to happen for whatever reason, to make someone look good or make someone look bad or to suggest a pretext for Trump to declare martial law. That's the conspiratorial one. Police were in on it. And so far, I've not seen evidence of that. Don't attribute malice when incompetence adequately covers what we've seen. So then we get to the Capitol Police didn't know what to expect versus they knew what to expect and just didn't prepare enough. There are reports about the Capitol Police rejecting some federal offers for help, both in advance of and in the moment of what was going on. It still has to be investigated. And if it's true that Capitol Police rejected further offers of help, then that's a disaster and it has to be investigated. Why did leadership refuse the help? What are the explanations? And that needs to be looked at. And then the other side of it would be they simply didn't realize the risk that was posed and they were caught unprepared. And that also requires an investigation because we're talking about securing the Capitol when the vice president is going to be there at a time crucial to American democracy. So either way, it would be a failure. We just have to figure it out. Now, from a very, logistical, rote perspective, a lot of this has to do with lack of enough perimeters. And, there's just crowd control stuff. Like, I don't know if people are looking for an answer that's very specific to crowd control, but when you have such a large crowd, it has to be managed earlier. It is true that Trump hesitated, and ultimately it seems it was even Mike Pence who sent the National Guard once things were going on. It is true that it took a while for state troopers from Virginia and others to show up. That's all true. But the reality is it's already too late at that point. To try to retake control of a scene when it has already degenerated to what it had degenerated at that point in time by 1:40, 1:50 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, it's too late. Large crowds of protesters have to be managed earlier. The Capitol should have been surrounded and secured earlier with multiple perimeters. And in addition to that, the crowds should have been directed even when they were blocks away. They should have been redirected. And that's the only way you can manage and direct a crowd that large, because it didn't happen. The protesters were able to start congregating in large groups already close to the Capitol. And then you had another failure, which was, as we saw the barriers breached, still, kind of far from the Capitol. At that point, the number of officers left on the Capitol steps was too small to control what was happening. And so the perimeter was pushed further back. So some of the analyses we've seen are that it was completely unthinkable not to have multiple layers of police cordons on the outskirts of the complex and even further out. Fences and barricades, there were some, but they're useless unless you're properly directing the crowd. You have to start making arrests early, very importantly. Understand that when the first people started battling with the officers at the barriers near the Capitol, yes, there weren't nearly enough officers, and yes, they never should have been that close in groups that large. But nobody got arrested. And you could say, well, the police were overwhelmed. How can they start arresting people right away? It's fair. It was all completely mismanaged. But one of the things you want to do is you need to start making the arrests early. You need to immediately target the people that seem most violent. Some of the people that were earliest, most violent on video, they stuck around for hours and eventually made it into the Capitol. So everything that happened was done wrong. By the way, I'm speaking in defense of the officers in the sense that early there were people already being violent with the officers, hitting them with the barriers themselves. The people being violent with officers need to be arrested right away, and they weren't. So everything went wrong. The motives and explanations we still don't know, but from a logistical crowd control standpoint, everything went wrong in the sense that none of the stuff that should have been done was done. And we'll learn more about it, I'm sure, in 2 months when some report is published that nobody will see, but we'll pay attention for and we'll take a look at. One of our sponsors today is Lucy, and they are giving my audience 20% off. Lucy is a company founded by Caltech scientists with only one mission, which is to help people quit smoking and vaping by offering a clean, affordable nicotine alternative. Now, many of you know, you've heard the stories. I've known several people in my life who have struggled with quitting smoking. I've seen how difficult it can be. And nicotine alternatives can be hugely helpful. Lucy offers a nicotine gum in 3 flavors: wintergreen, cinnamon, and pomegranate. They also have lozenges, which come in cherry ice flavor. Lucy is affordable. It'll ship right to your door. You don't have to go out to the store. Shipping is always free. You can buy single boxes or save with a subscription. It's the year 2020. It's time to throw the cigarettes away and get rid of the vape, and Lucy can make it easier. You'll find a ton of excellent reviews online from countless people who have used Lucy to quit smoking and vaping. Go check them out at lucy.co. I've put the link right underneath this video, and you'll get 20% off when you use the coupon code Pakman. And just a quick disclaimer, I'm required to give: these products contain nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.